The loud warning sirens filled every corner of the huge space station where the Galactic Council met. Ambassador Kelvin sat at his desk, staring at the screen showing a message that made his blood run cold. The message came from the Zilani people, and it was not good news at all. For weeks now, the Zilani civilization had been under attack. These were peaceful people who had never hurt anyone in their entire history. They lived on 3 beautiful planets filled with gardens, libraries, and art museums. But now, all of that was being destroyed by machines called harvesters. These were not ordinary machines. They were like giant metal insects that could think for themselves. They would land on a planet and start eating everything. Trees, buildings, mountains, even the air itself. They would chew it all up and turn it into more machines just like themselves. Commander Torres walked into the room. Her face looked tired and sad. She had been fighting these machines for months now, and things were getting worse every day. "Sir, we just lost contact with Rescue Fleet 7, she said quietly. "That makes it the 7th fleet we've lost this month." Kelvin rubbed his forehead. 7 fleets meant thousands of good soldiers were gone. "What happened to them?" he asked. Torres sat down heavily in a chair. "Same thing that happened to all the others. The harvester machines are too smart. Every time we try a new attack, they learn from it and get stronger. And our people can't even breathe on those planets. The air there is like poison. Our soldiers need special suits just to stay alive for a few minutes." The Zilani planets had air that was full of chemicals that would kill most aliens instantly. It was like trying to breathe acid, even with the best protection suits. Council soldiers could only work there for short periods before they had to leave. In the main meeting room, dozens of alien leaders sat around a giant table. They all looked worried and scared. These were the smartest beings in the galaxy, but they had no idea how to solve this problem. The harvesters had already eaten 2 complete star systems. If they were not stopped soon, they would spread across the galaxy like a disease. Council member Vextar was a tall alien, with tentacles instead of arms. He was usually very calm, but now his tentacles were moving around nervously. He cleared his throat and said something that made everyone stop talking. "Maybe we should ask the humans for help." The room became completely quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. Everyone knew about humans, but nobody really wanted to deal with them. Humans came from a planet called Earth, which most aliens called a death. This meant it was so dangerous that it should have killed everything living on it. But somehow, humans not only survived there, they actually thrived. Most aliens thought humans were crazy. They lived on a planet where the weather could kill them, where dangerous animals hunted them, and where even the plants were sometimes poisonous. Other species needed special equipment just to visit Earth for a few hours. But humans walked around their deadly planet like it was a nice park. Ambassador Kelvin looked around the room at all the worried faces. He had met humans before, and they made him nervous. They were loud, unpredictable, and seemed to think violence was the answer to every problem. But they were also incredibly tough and refused to give up no matter how bad things got. "They are our last hope," Kelvin finally said with a heavy sigh. "Send the message to Earth. Tell the humans we need their help." The transport ship docked at the Galactic Council station with a loud thump that made the whole structure shake. Most alien ships landed softly and quietly, but human ships always seemed to announce their arrival like they were kicking down a door. The airlock opened with a hiss, and out stepped 3 humans who looked nothing like what the aliens expected. Captain Jake Morrison was the first to emerge. He was a tall man with short brown hair and hands that looked like they had seen plenty of hard work. His combat boots made loud clanking sounds on the metal floor as he walked. The aliens watching from behind their protective barriers winced at the noise. In their culture, making loud sounds was considered very rude. Behind Jake came Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, a woman with dark hair tied back in a ponytail. She carried a large bag full of tools and equipment that looked like it had been put together in someone's garage. The aliens were used to seeing perfectly manufactured, shiny equipment. Maria's gear looked old and used, but somehow you could tell it would work when needed. The third human was Corporal Danny Williams, a young man who seemed to be looking at everything with curious eyes, while the other two humans looked serious. Danny had a small smile on his face like he was excited about something. He kept glancing around at all the alien technology and whispering comments to his teammates. What worried the aliens most was how simple their environmental suits looked. When other species visited the station, they wore complicated suits with dozens of tubes, filters, and monitoring devices. The human suits looked like they were made from basic materials and held together with tape and determination. Ambassador Kelvin approached the humans carefully. His reptilian scales were changing colors rapidly, which happened when he was nervous. "Welcome to Council Station Alpha," he said in his most diplomatic voice. "We are grateful that Earth decided to help us with this crisis." Jake looked around at the fancy decorations and gleaming walls of the station. Everything was perfectly clean and organized. It reminded him of a hospital back on Earth, the kind of place where people spoke in whispers and were afraid to touch anything. "Nice place you got here," he said, though his tone suggested he found it a bit too fancy for his taste. They walked to a large room where a three-dimensional map of the Zelani star system floated in the air. The map showed the 3 planets under attack, with red dots representing the harvester machines. There were thousands of red dots, and more appeared every few seconds as the machines made copies of themselves. Jake studied the display while scratching his chin. "So let me understand this situation," he said in his slow, thoughtful way of talking. "These robot bugs are eating 3 whole planets. Your expensive fleets with all their fancy technology cannot stop them. The air on those planets is poisonous. And you want us simple country folks to go down there and fix this mess." Ambassador Kelvin's scales turned a deeper shade of blue, which meant he was getting more anxious. "Captain, you must understand, the atmospheric composition of those worlds would kill most species within minutes. The chemical mixture is highly corrosive and toxic. Even our best environmental suits can only protect someone for a short time." Jake turned to look at his teammates and grinned. It was the kind of smile that meant he was about to do something that other people would think was crazy. "Hell, that does not sound too bad. Sounds like a normal Tuesday back home in Texas. You should see what the air is like during dust storm season." Maria Rodriguez stepped forward and cracked her knuckles. The sound made several nearby aliens jump backward. "Captain, I think these fancy machines have never met humans before. They probably expect everyone to be as delicate as these folks." She gestured toward the aliens, who looked offended but also curious about what she meant. Danny Williams was still staring at the holographic display with fascination. "Sir, look at how organized these harvester things are. They move in perfect patterns and follow logical rules. That might be their weakness, right there." The human ship Iron Will came screaming down through the poisonous clouds of Zelani Prime like a falling star. But this was not an accident. Captain Jake Morrison was actually steering the ship straight down on purpose, aiming directly at the largest group of harvester machines he could find on the planet's surface, up in orbit. The alien observers watched in complete shock through their monitoring screens. Ambassador Kelvin's scales had turned completely white, which happened when he was terrified. "What are they doing?" he whispered. "That is not how you land a ship." Council member Vextar's tentacles were waving around wildly. "They have lost their minds. No sane being would try to land in the middle of an enemy swarm." The ship hit the ground hard, bouncing twice before sliding to a stop. Smoke and sparks flew everywhere. Any normal crew would have been killed by such a rough landing. But within minutes, the cargo bay doors opened, and out walked the 3 humans like nothing unusual had happened. Jake stepped out first, breathing the toxic air without any problems. The atmosphere that would kill most aliens in seconds was just making him cough a little, like he had a minor cold. Well, that was fun, he said, stretching his back. Nothing like a good crash landing to get the blood flowing. Maria followed him out, carrying her bag of tools, and looking around at all the broken harvester machines that had been crushed by their landing. Sir, I count at least 20 damaged units in our immediate area. Looks like our entrance made quite an impression. Danny Williams was the last one out, and he was actually excited. Did you see how those machines moved when we came down? They scattered in perfect geometric patterns. Very predictable. He was already pulling electronic parts out of his backpack, getting ready to build something. The harvester machines that survived the crash began moving toward the humans. These were big metal creatures that looked like a cross between spiders and bulldozers. They had cutting tools, grinding equipment, and sensors that could detect any kind of threat. They were designed to handle any enemy the galaxy could throw at them, but they had never faced humans before. Jake picked up a piece of twisted metal from their crashed ship and hefted it like a baseball bat. Well, boys and girls, looks like we got ourselves a welcoming committee, instead of being scared. He seemed genuinely happy about the approaching danger. Maria was already taking apart one of the damaged harvester units with her tools. She worked fast, pulling out circuit boards and examining them closely. These machines are definitely smart, she called out, while dodging a cutting beam from another harvester. But they think in straight lines. Very logical, very predictable. Danny had found a quiet spot behind some rocks and was furiously connecting wires and electronic components together. Within minutes, he had built something that looked like a metal ball with blinking lights all over it. Got it? He shouted. Homemade electromagnetic pulse grenade, made from spare parts and a lot of hope. He threw the device into a group of advancing harvesters. There was a bright flash of light, and suddenly, 6 machines just stopped moving. Their electronic brains had been scrambled by the pulse. Outstanding work, Danny, Jake yelled, while swinging his makeshift club at another machine. These things may be smart, but they sure do not know how to handle good old-fashioned human creativity. Maria had figured out something important about how the machines worked. She spoke into her radio, so the aliens in orbit could hear. These harvester things think like computers. Everything they do follows rules and patterns. They analyze threats and respond with the most logical solution. Another group of machines approached, moving in a perfect formation, like soldiers marching in a parade. Jake grinned and pulled out another explosive device that Danny had quickly put together from random parts. But here is the thing about humans. Jake continued Maria's thought, as he tossed the bomb in a direction the machines would never expect. We do not think logically, we think creatively, and you cannot program a computer to predict crazy. The sky above Zolani Prime turned black as more harvester ships arrived from deep space. They came down like a metal rain, thousands upon thousands of fresh machines, ready to continue the planet-eating work. The 3 humans on the surface looked up at the overwhelming sight and realized their situation had just become much worse. Jake's homemade club was bent and broken. Maria's tool bag was nearly empty, and most of her equipment had stopped working hours ago. Danny's backpack of spare parts was almost gone, used up making explosive devices and electromagnetic weapons. Their crashed ship was nothing but twisted metal and smoke now. Any reasonable military force would have called for evacuation immediately. Up in orbit, Ambassador Kelvin watched the hopeless scene through his monitoring equipment. The humans were completely surrounded by enemies, cut off from any help, and facing impossible odds. Any other species in the galaxy would retreat now, he said quietly to Commander Torres. This is clearly a suicide mission. But Jake's voice came crackling through the radio, sounding as calm as if he were discussing the weather back home. Retreat is not really in our vocabulary, Ambassador. When humans get backed into a corner, we do not run away. We get creative. Maria was crouched behind the wreckage of a harvester machine, studying a handheld device that showed the planet's power systems. The Zilani people had built an advanced electrical grid that connected all their cities and power plants across the entire world. It was designed to share energy efficiently and keep their civilization running smoothly. "Jake," she called out, while dodging laser blasts from approaching enemies. "I have an idea, but it is completely insane. What if we could turn this whole planet into one giant electromagnetic pulse weapon?" Danny overheard her, and his eyes lit up with excitement. Despite being surrounded by deadly machines, he was getting that look he always got when faced with an interesting technical challenge. "The power grid," he shouted. "If we could overload every power plant on the planet at the exact same time, the electromagnetic feedback would fry every electronic device for hundreds of miles." Jake was fighting his way through a crowd of harvester machines, using nothing but a broken piece of metal and pure determination. Each machine he faced was bigger and stronger than him, but somehow he kept moving forward. "Sounds like a plan to me. What do you two need?" Maria pointed toward a tall spire in the distance that rose above the ruined city. It looked like a giant antenna covered in blinking lights and electrical equipment. "That is the main power control center. If we can reach it and rewire the safety systems, we can cause a controlled overload across the entire planetary grid." The problem was that the spire was surrounded by hundreds of harvester machines, and it was at least 2 miles away through enemy territory. Getting there would mean fighting through an army of mechanical enemies with almost no weapons or equipment left. "Most military strategists would say this is impossible," Commander Torres muttered as she watched from orbit. The humans were so outnumbered that her sensors could barely count all the enemy machines. But Jake was already running toward the spire, somehow finding energy he did not know he had left. Behind him, Maria and Danny were working together to create one last electromagnetic pulse device from their remaining spare parts. They needed to clear a path through the enemy lines. "Danny, can you jury-rig something big enough to take out 50 machines at once?" Maria asked, while stripping wires from a broken communication device. "Give me 3 minutes and some prayer," Danny replied, his hands moving fast as he connected circuits and bypassed safety systems that were designed to prevent exactly what he was trying to do. Council member Vexstar watched the impossible scene unfolding below. 3 humans with no backup, no heavy weapons, and no chance of survival were somehow still fighting. "This is either the most brilliant military strategy I have ever seen, or the most suicidal." Ambassador Kelvin had been studying human behavior for months now, trying to understand these strange creatures from the death world called Earth. "With humans," he said with something that might have been admiration in his voice, "it is usually both at the same time." The moment Danny connected the final wire, the entire planet of Zilani Prime lit up like a giant light bulb. Every power plant, every electrical grid, and every energy source on the world suddenly pushed all their power into one massive surge. The electromagnetic pulse that resulted was so powerful that it could be seen from space as a bright blue wave that spread across the planet's surface in seconds. All across the world, thousands of harvester machines suddenly stopped moving. Their electronic brains, which had been so smart and adaptable just moments before, were completely fried by the enormous electrical blast. The giant metal spiders collapsed where they stood. The flying units fell from the sky like broken toys. Even the massive harvester ships in orbit went dark and began drifting helplessly through space. The 3 humans stood in the smoking ruins of the control center, breathing heavily and looking around at the sudden silence. After hours of constant fighting, the quiet felt strange and almost unreal. Jake was covered in cuts and burns, Maria's clothes were torn and dirty, and Danny's hair was sticking up from all the electrical energy, but they were all still alive. Up in orbit, the alien observers stared at their screens in complete shock. Ambassador Kelvin's scales had turned a bright gold color, which happened when he was amazed by something beyond his understanding. "The entire harvester fleet is dead," he whispered. "Every single machine in the system has been destroyed, Commander." Torres was running calculations on her computer, trying to figure out how the humans had survived what should have been impossible. The electromagnetic pulse should have killed them too. Their equipment, their radios, even their heart monitors should have stopped working. But down on the planet's surface, Jake was calmly opening a small metal box and pulling out what looked like a basic first aid kit. He began treating his radiation burns with simple medicine, the kind that any human might carry on a camping trip. The aliens watching could not believe their eyes. Within hours, the surviving Zalani people began emerging from their underground shelters. These were peaceful beings, who looked somewhat like tall, thin humans, but with pale blue skin and large eyes. They had been hiding in fear for weeks, watching their beautiful world get destroyed piece by piece. Now they stepped outside to find their cities in ruins, but their planet finally free. The first Zalani to approach the humans was an elderly female who seemed to be some kind of leader. She walked carefully toward Jake, Maria, and Danny, who were sitting on some rubble and sharing what looked like simple food from small packages. "You saved our world," she said in a voice filled with wonder. "How can we ever repay you?" Jake looked up from his meal and smiled. "No payment needed, ma'am. We just did what anyone would do when folks are in trouble." The Zalani woman stared at him in confusion. In her experience, nobody risked their lives for strangers without expecting something in return. Word of what happened on Zalani Prime spread across the galaxy, faster than light-speed communication. Every alien species heard the story of how 3 humans with basic equipment had accomplished what entire fleets of advanced warships could not do. Some aliens did not believe the reports. Others wanted to study humans to understand how such a thing was possible. Weeks later, the Galactic Council held a special meeting. The huge chamber was filled with representatives from hundreds of different worlds. Ambassador Kelvin stood at the center podium and made an announcement that shocked everyone present. "The Council has voted unanimously to invite humanity to join us as a protector species," he declared. "We offer them full membership, advanced technology, and the honor of defending peaceful civilizations across the galaxy." Jake Morrison was invited to the ceremony, but he showed up wearing the same simple clothes he had worn during the battle. While alien dignitaries wore fancy robes and ceremonial decorations, Jake looked like he had just finished working on a farm. He listened politely to all the speeches and formal offers. When it was his turn to speak, Jake stood up and shouldered his worn backpack. "We appreciate the offer, we really do," he said in his slow, thoughtful way. "But we just got word about some trouble brewing out in the Outer Rim territories. Sounds like there are people out there who need help, and we cannot let them down." The aliens in the chamber looked at each other in confusion. They were offering humans wealth, power, and prestige, but Jake was turning it down to help strangers he had never met. As Jake walked toward the exit, Ambassador Kelvin called out, "Why? Why do you risk your lives for people you do not even know?" Jake paused at the doorway and looked back with a simple smile. "Because that is what humans do. When someone needs help, you help them. It is not complicated." The new ship Iron Will, too, launched from the station later that day, carrying the same 3 humans toward their next mission. As the aliens watched it disappear into space, they finally understood something important about these strange creatures from the Death World, called Earth. Sometimes the best way to solve impossible problems is not with fancy technology or overwhelming firepower. Sometimes you just need people who refuse to give up, no matter how bad things look.